I'm Master of Wine Brestock, and I am in the cellar here at the end of harvest, where we have several fermentations still continuing and white fermentations in barrel behind me. And so I wanted to talk a little bit today about fermentation vessels and why we use so many, and what some of the expressions are that we get from using the different sizes of fermentation vessel throughout harvest. Over here, on the far left here, we have a backrow 48. That is generally the standard small winemaker fermentation vessel. It's a food grade plastic that has relatively thick walls that help to keep in the heat. They hold about 1.2, 1.3 tons of fruit in them, and we generally will ferment reds on their skins or skin fermented whites in these vessels, and it allows the fermentation to gather enough heat through that 1.2, 1.3 tons to keep a regular healthy fermentation that doesn't get too cold or too hot. So the higher a temperature goes during fermentation, the more we're going to blow off the delicate primary fruit and floral volatiles in the wine. Also, the hotter a fermentation gets, we're going to extract more color and tannins from the skins as well. And also the flavors that are going to come are not going to be maybe as complex, because the yeast are racing through that fermentation instead of having a gradual fermentation that builds complexity of flavors over a 14-day, 20-day period. So we generally do punch downs or pump overs in the macro 48, and that's usually a 14-day fermentation with temperatures not really rising too much above 88 degrees and not dropping below 68 degrees. So that really nice 20-degree window that gives us the real true expression of the grape variety and the vineyard in the cellar. What you also see in here is stainless steel tanks, and we use these generally for direct pressing of white wines and rosé. And the stainless steel allows us to keep, if they have a glycol fitting, it allows us to keep the fermentation cool, which again, coming back to that ever important temperature conversation, means that we're going to retain the aromatics in the fruit. So when we're talking about rosé, and in this one we have a Gamay and Dolcetto rosé fermenting at the moment, we like to keep those relatively cool, so not getting above 70 degrees and ideally staying around 63, 65 degrees to keep those aromatics retained. For Sauvignon Blanc and Riesling and really delicate aromatics as well, we might even go a little bit cooler in the fermentation, around 55 to 58 degrees, keeping that fermentation really, really cool and vibrant and allowing those primary fruit flavors and florals to be captured and enhanced. When we move into white fermentations in barrel, which is what we also have in the cellar here, what we're doing here is keeping a smaller vessel and also keeping the yeast lees in that vessel and allowing the wine to ferment and age on its lees through malolactic fermentation on lees as well. So these barrels generally don't stay as cool, nor do they get as hot as a larger fermentation, and it's very self-contained, but it has a very small micro-oxygenation coming from the ingress of oxygen into the barrel that helps to keep those yeast in the barrel healthy. And we do a very natural fermentation in barrel. When the fermentation finishes, those yeast lees die, and we generally keep them on their yeast lees until they finish malolactic fermentation, which if we don't inoculate from malolactic fermentation, it will occur naturally when the spring comes again. So it may have been finished before the cold weather comes in November and December, or those yeast may wake up again and finish the malolactic fermentation in the spring. What that gives us is additional complexity in the wines by keeping them on their mother lees. It also keeps the wine healthier and fresher by keeping it in contact with those mother lees instead of racking it off of its lees and putting it in a more delicate state that allows it to oxidize. So we like to keep these barrels fully topped. We top them all winter long, and then allow the fermentation, malolactic secondary fermentation, to kick off again if we're doing that in the spring. I also have in the cellar these beautiful amphora clay pots. So these vessels have been around for winemaking for more than 8,000 years. So what these are really for us is a nod back to our heritage of what we began fermenting in, what we began really carrying everything in. But these give us a little bit more play in terms of flavor complexity. I like to think of all the vessels that I have in the cellar as contributing to my spice rack of flavors for my wines. So if I have a new oak barrel, that's going to give me more vanillin, more smoky, toasty, chocolatey oak characters, depending on the firing level of the oak barrel. And if I have a neutral barrel, that's really just about the vessel and the lees conversation. With the clay vessels, if it's not fired as long, this is going to give me more clay flavors on my wine. And if it's a very hot, high firing, like the Novum at the end there, that's going to give me a very neutral profile to my wines. However, because of the thickness of the clay walls and the ability to not temperature control these fermentations are all going to be slightly different because of the temperatures involved in having thinner walls and a cooler fermentation. So generally more aromatic, more protected primary fruit flavors coming from amphora. What I also like about amphora is because of their shape, that concave shape, that egg-like shape, the seeds and tannins of these wines tend to be a little more smooth earlier. Wines from amphora tend to be able to be drunk a little bit earlier because the seeds and the grapes stay in this sort of constant motion because of the shape of that vessel, and the heavier solids fall right to the bottom of that vessel, and I just leave them there for however long I'm fermenting on their skins or keeping them on élevage in their skins as well. I will also not only ferment in these vessels, but I will also press and then return the wine to these vessels for élevage and aging. Again, that convex motion really keeps the softening of the tannins moving around and makes these really supple, long chain tannin profiles that I really just find so incredibly elegant from wines that come from these shaped vessels. Sign up for my YouTube channel and sign up to my newsletter, breestockmw.com, and follow me on Instagram at breestockmw, and stay tuned.